This empire is crumbling, so I've been told. In the meantime, these items we have in store for you today, May 7th, 2021, allegedly. DNA exoneration post-DOA, contradicting public servants, more tumultuous times in Latinized America, workers and social rights activists hit the streets, and a few cops. Fly me, don't try me. Airport violence allegedly on the rise. And cousins make dozens, the furry ones. At least scientists get funds to tell us that animals don't mind doing it with their relatives. It's all in one big roundup for this 7-day period of the Balanced Reality Report. Welcome again. I'm your presenter Pharoh, and of course, thanks again for sparing time to listen in. Here we go. Life is supposed to be appreciated and respected, but when a life is lost due to the actions or inaction of bureaucrats, it is inexcusable. Such is the tragic case of Liddell Lee. It was learned this week that DNA evidence could clear Liddell Lee, an Aboriginal man, aka so-called black man, from Arkansas. 4 years after his execution by state of Arkansas, Lee was sentenced to death in 1995 for the death of his neighbor, Deborah Reese. Lee had always maintained his innocence.
Now, whether capital punishment should be finally abolished has been debated for years, as if its margin of error isn't enough to finally do away with the practice. Case in point, Liddell Lee. The state had 8 men lined up to execute in 11 days before their supply of lethal injection drugs expired. Lee was the first. He was on death row for the 1993 murder of his neighbor, a crime Lee maintained from his arrest to his execution that he never committed. Fast forward to last year, after lawsuits from the Innocence Project and the ACLU, the city of Jacksonville allowed new tests to be done on fingerprints and DNA evidence from the crime scene. It revealed DNA from another man, including DNA on the murder weapon and the bloody shirt wrapped around it. Joining me now to discuss is VNC's legal contributor and veteran prosecutor Paul Henderson. All right, Paul, this is such a tragic case, and unfortunately, it's not a unique one. This is precisely why the death penalty should just be abolished. But there's a trend when it comes to people of color. What are the racial disparities when it comes to wrongful convictions and the death penalty?
Well, there's a lot of disparities, and that's the big part of this problem, because 43% of all of the executions have been for people of color. And these are stats that folks can find very quickly with the ACLU. And even currently, we have 55% of death row is made up of people of color. That's a real problem. There are countless studies that have shown us again and again. One of them that I think is really interesting from North Carolina, which balanced both charges and sentences, found that it's 3.5 times more likely for the defendant to get death penalty if they are black and not white. And so it shines the light on this case in particular, where the governor in this case said that the jury found them guilty based on the evidence that they had. And that was his response to finding out that the DNA showed that it was someone else that likely committed the offense. That's a rationalization, not a justification. There's so much new technology out there now as it refers to both fingerprints and with DNA evidence, that shining the light on the race disparities tied to the lack of focus to address these concerns is a real problem. That's the issue. It's race. We just have to say it, and we just have to deal with it and review all of this.
You can hear or see the rest of the interview online at BNC News. You may also recall back in April 2017 when the U.S. Supreme Court cleared the way for the state of Arkansas to put to death the largest number of men in the shortest amount of time so that the state could use its supply of lethal injection drugs. Unsurprisingly, most of those men whose appeals were rejected were Aboriginal Americans, aka so-called black.
Arkansas has been in a rush to carry out a series of executions before the end of the month when the potency of one of the drugs used in the process expires. The state planned to execute 2 death row inmates last night. The court spared 1 man, but the other was pronounced dead at 11:56 p.m. after the Supreme Court rejected the last-minute appeals. It was the state's first execution since 2005, one that state officials said was necessary because a drug used for lethal injections is about to expire. Convicted murderer Liddell Lee was put to death just before midnight Arkansas time after the state and U.S. Supreme Courts denied efforts to stop his execution. Lee's death followed last-minute legal battles between his defense team and lawyers for the state of Arkansas over the state's right to use the drug midazolam as part of its lethal injection process. Lee, who was 51, was sentenced to death in 1995 in Pulaski County, Arkansas, for the murder of 26-year-old Deborah Reese. He had maintained his innocence. Arkansas originally sought to execute Lee and 7 other men convicted of different murders decades ago over an 11-day period because its supply of midazolam expires April 30th. Drug companies also said their products were not intended for use in executions.
This is significant because at no point in modern American history has any state ever attempted to carry out so many executions in such a short period of time.
As usual in these last-minute appeals, the U.S. Supreme Court did not explain why it rejected them on a 5-4 vote. But one of the dissenters, Justice Stephen Breyer, said the state's rush to use midazolam as the reason for determining who will be executed and who will not is, quote, close to random.
That report from NBC's Today Show. The racial games people play are deadly, and no one plays the game better than politicians. Contradictory Kamala Harris flubs up again, and egregiously so. Do these politicians even review the public statements they make? It doesn't seem so. With so many uttering literally the same mantra that America is not a racist country, it comes across as if they are trying to convince themselves as they speak what they know is untrue. Or perhaps they are being selective about which racial group can claim America is racist towards them, and which racial group cannot, which seems to be the case. Though none of these politicians like VP Harris or South Carolina Representative or Republican Senator Tim Scott mention the words black or aboriginal, it's clear to whom they are referring when they basically group gaslight an entire racial population. But notice when Kamala and Biden come out against alleged trend of racial violence against Asians and PI communities. Suddenly America is a racist country, or racist country. So which is it, you public servants? Politicians? Is America racist for Asians and PI communities, or not racist for so-called blacks, aka aboriginals?
Over the past week, the President and I have traveled across the country to mark the passage of the American Rescue Plan, to tell the American people about how 100 million checks are on their way, about how 100 million vaccines have now been administered. Big news, good news. And we plan to come down here to Georgia, to the place that made it possible, to share that information. And then Tuesday night, we learned that 8 of our neighbors were killed in a heinous act of violence. Violence that has no place in the state of Georgia or in the United States of America. And we were reminded, yet again, that the crises we face are many, that the foes we face are many. As the President and I discussed with our AAPI community in a meeting earlier today, whatever the killer's motive, these facts are clear. 6 out of the 8 people killed on Tuesday night were of Asian descent. 7 were women. The shootings took place in businesses owned by Asian Americans. The shootings took place as violent hate crimes and discrimination against Asian Americans has risen dramatically over the last year and more. In fact, over the past year, 3,800 such incidents have been reported, 2 of 3 by women. everything from physical assaults to verbal accusations. And it's all harmful. And sadly, it's not new. Racism is real in America, and it has always been. Xenophobia is real in America, and always has been. Sexism, too. Asian Americans have been attacked and scapegoated. People who are perceived as Muslim know what it was like to live in our country after 9/11. For the last year, we've had people in positions of incredible power scapegoating Asian Americans, people with the biggest pulpits spreading this kind of hate. Ultimately, this is about who we are as a nation. This is about how we treat people with dignity and respect. Everyone has the right to go to work, to go to school, to walk down the street and be safe, and also the right to be recognized as an American, not as the other, not as them, but as us. A harm against any one of us is a harm against all of us. The President and I will not be silent. We will not stand by. We will always speak out against violence, hate crimes, and discrimination wherever and whenever it occurs.
I said from the beginning of my campaign for president that we needed to come together, that we needed to unite as one people, one nation, one America. I said in my kickoff speech in Philadelphia, I said that very same thing when I spoke at Gettysburg. I said that in my inaugural address. And I believe with every fiber on my being, there are simply some core values and beliefs that should bring us together as Americans. One of them is standing together against hate, against racism, the ugly poison that has long haunted and plagued our nation. The Vice President and I, as I said, met a little bit earlier, just before this, with leaders from the Asian American community here in Georgia. We talked about Tuesday's mass shooting, about another example of public health crisis of gun violence in this country. 8 people killed, 7 women, 6 were of Asian descent. All fellow Americans, each one of them we mourn. Too many Asian Americans have been walking up and down the streets and worrying, waking up each morning the past year feeling their safety and the safety of their loved ones are at stake. It's been a year of living in fear for their lives just to walk down the street. The conversation we had today with the AAPI leaders and that we're hearing all across the country is that hate and violence often hide in plain sight. It's often met with silence. That's been true throughout our history. But that has to change because our silence is complicity. We cannot be complicit. We have to speak out. We have to act. In my first week in office, I signed an executive order directing federal agencies to combat this resurgence of xenophobia. The Department of Justice is strengthening its partnership with the AAPI community to prevent these crimes, in addition to its other work to take on violent extremists and domestic terrorism. I'm calling on Congress to pass and get to my desk the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act. And the House just passed the reauthorization for the Violence Against Women Act, a law I authored more than 25 years ago. As one of my proudest legislative achievements. I call on the Senate to swiftly pass it and get it to my desk. But for all the good that laws can do, we have to change our hearts. Hate can have no safe harbor in America. It must stop. And it's on all of us together, to make it stop.
Thanks to Global News Network for that clip. But this didn't start with Democrats. Their alleged rivals, the Republicans, also got in on the campaign earlier in the year, or last year rather. You may recall 8 months ago during the 2020 Republican National Convention when former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley, who despite her party affiliation has a lot in common with VP Kamala Harris. Check this out. But keep in mind as you listen to Mrs. Harris speak about her alleged East Indian ethnicity that in appearance she has more in common with Neil Patrick Harris than she does with former prosecuting attorney, now VP, Kamala Harris, who also claims to be a proud East Asian whose mother is from India. The following audio is from NBC at the RNC.
In much of the Democratic Party, it's now fashionable to say that America is racist. That is a lie. America is not a racist country. This is personal for me. I am the proud daughter of Indian immigrants. They came to America and settled in a small southern town. My father wore a turban. My mother wore a sari. I was a brown girl in a black and white world. We faced discrimination and hardship, but my parents never gave in to grievance and hate. My mom built a successful business. My dad taught 30 years at a historically black college. And the people of South Carolina chose me as their first minority and first female governor. America is a story that's a work in progress. Now is the time to build on that progress and make America even freer, fairer, and better for everyone. That's why it's so tragic to see so much of the Democratic Party turning a blind eye towards riots and rage. The American people know we can do better. And of course we value and respect every black life. The black cops who've been shot in the line of duty, they matter. The black small business owners who've watched their life's work go up in flames, they matter. The black kids who've been gunned down on the playground, their lives matter too. And their lives are being ruined and stolen by the violence on our streets. It doesn't have to be like this. It wasn't like this in South Carolina 5 years ago. Our state came face to face with evil. A white supremacist walked into Mother Emanuel Church during Bible study. 12 African Americans pulled up a chair and prayed with him for an hour. Then he began to shoot. After that horrific tragedy, we didn't turn against each other. We came together, black and white, Democrat and Republican. Together, we made the hard choices needed to heal and removed a divisive symbol peacefully and respectfully. What happened then should give us hope now. America isn't perfect, but the principles we hold dear are perfect. There's one thing I've learned. It's that even on our worst day, we are blessed to live in America. It's time to keep that blessing alive for the next generation. This president and this party are committed to that noble task.
From public servants whose speeches conflict with reality to conflict in reality, we go to Colombia, South America, where violence erupted in so-called working-class neighborhoods of Western Cali, Colombia. Residents protested tax reform policies of so-called conservative President Iván L. Duque.
Another terrifying night in Colombia's third largest city, Cali. Videos shot by residents of two working-class neighborhoods apparently show the police shooting indiscriminately against protesters. The morning after, the scenes of destruction were unmistakable. The mayor said at least 5 people were killed and 33 injured.
We condemn in an absolute way any expression of violence, any expression that puts the life, integrity and property of the men and women of this territory at risk.
The western city of Cali has become the epicenter of the ongoing protests against the social and economic policies of President Ivan Duque. On Tuesday, the United Nations and the European Union condemned the excessive use of force on part of Colombia's security forces to try and contain the unrest.
We are deeply alarmed at developments in the city of Cali in Colombia, where police opened fire overnight on demonstrations protesting against tax reforms, reportedly killing and injuring a number of people. We express our profound shock at the events there and stress our solidarity with those who have lost their lives, as well as the injured and their families.
The White House also issued a statement urging the utmost restraint by public forces and asking the government to investigate any human rights violation. But Colombia's defense minister responded saying Colombia's forces respect human rights and blamed criminal gangs for the violence.
Our national police, our army and our navy act in strict compliance with the law. These vandals that we have already denounced act systematically, deliberately and are financed by criminal organizations, and they have the objective of destabilizing certain regions. Every day they change their objectives. Yesterday the objective was the police. Orders to shoot our police officers.
Despite the violence, the demonstrations will continue. What started as a protest against tax hikes has billowed to a nationwide cry against inequalities and now police brutalities. Major unions have called for another nationwide day of demonstrations on Wednesday, while cities like Cali are bracing for what could be another night of terror. Alessandro Rampietti, Al Jazeera, Bogotá.
That report provided by Al Jazeera. Anyway, you'd think Colombian voters would know better than to elect a so-called right-wing candidate with the last name El Duque. I mean, isn't that just a little too close to mid-20th century proxy Italian dictator Benito Mussolini's nickname El Duce? But who studies history these days? Ironically, Westernized press has all but been deliberately silent regarding the ongoing state-funded violence that has plagued Choco, Cauca, and Valle de Cauca, departments of Western Colombia. All three departments contain largely aboriginal or indigenous, aka so-called Afro-Colombian populations. These departments, over the years, have been kept economically impoverished, with the Choco department at the lowest of the economic poverty ladder. These economic conditions are compounded by the presence of armed groups led by leftist guerrilla groups, including the National Liberation Army, or ELN, and right-wing paramilitary groups who control the drug trade, as well as military weapons trafficking along the Arulo River. And let's not forget other obvious forms of violence, such as exhaustive corporate gold, platinum, and ore mining by Canadian, US, and Brazilian companies, plus illegal mining by armed gangs. The recent protest violence and killings by police in Cali, Colombia pales in comparison to the non-stop systematic racist violence in Choco, Cauca, and Valle de Cauca at the hands of the Colombian government, controlled by both so-called white and mestizo Colombians. The empire, however, is crumbling all over this world, and so it goes. Replacing it with equal justice and equal wealth for all is now priority. Also in Latinized America, this time Mexico, tragedy struck early last week when a subway overpass collapsed on Monday night in Mexico City, sending the cars of a passenger train plunging to the busy street and sidewalk below, killing at least 24 people, including children, the city's mayor said. At least 70 others were transported to hospitals with injuries. Here is an audio clip from CNN with more details.
Overnight, an overpass in Mexico City's metro partially collapsed, sending a train plunging down onto a busy street below, killing at least 23 people, including an unspecified number of children, and injuring dozens of others. Videos on Mexican television and posted to social media capturing the crash. Train train cars seen dangling in midair. The overpass then collapsing onto cars on the road below, trapping vehicles under rubble. This man says he heard the collapse. He says when he heard the screeching, I even thought it was a car that collided, but no, I came out and saw the scene. This couple says they had already gone to bed. The sound of the crash waking them up. We were inside with my daughter. We heard the sound. Horrible, 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 she says. Emergency medical teams and firefighters at the scene working feverishly throughout the night, desperately and carefully combing through the wreckage looking for survivors. Hundreds of police officers and military personnel cordoned off the scene as friends and relatives of people believed to be on the trains gathered outside the perimeter. The mayor of Mexico City says there was one person in his car underneath the tracks. He was rescued and is alive in a hospital. This morning, officials are asking residents for understanding and patience as they search for answers about how this tragedy happened.
Also in Mexico, Spain gets mock invasion by sea by so-called militant libertarian socialist political organization from southern Mexico who call themselves Zapatistas. Zapatista organizers of the mock invasion constructed small boats and set sail symbolically in protest of Mexican government, a vestige of Spanish invaders, environmental and social policies which negatively impact lower-class mestizos who refer to themselves as indigenous. The militant group is comprised mainly of mestizos from the Chiapas region of southern Mexico. Thanks to Al Jazeera for the following report.
It's a voyage that began only a few weeks ago in southern Mexico. But for 7 members of Mexico's Zapatista Army of National Liberation, it's a journey 500 years in the making. After traveling 1,000 kilometers overland, they prepared a small flotilla of canoes for a transatlantic voyage. The delegation is codenamed Squadron 421, and their mission is a symbolic conquest of Europe.
We want to learn more how these other worlds are. We want to listen, we want to share. We want to find out how it is, so we can learn.
In the Mexican capital, supporters of the militant socialist collective known as the Zapatistas gathered to wish safe travels to the would-be conquerors.
This is a trip that has its first stop in Europe and includes a visit to 30 countries. The intention is to also arrive in other continents.
After leading a brief armed rebellion in 1994 in southern Mexico, the Zapatistas have often been characterized as a militant separatist group, though the collective has since evolved into more of a political organization that places an emphasis on the rights of indigenous people. Activists say they hope demonstrations like these will dispel rumors about the Zapatista rebel collective and teach more people about the history of Mexico's revolutionary movements.
Organizers here in Mexico City encouraged demonstrators to build their own paper boats, a gesture that both symbolizes the first arrival of Spanish conquistadors and the return voyage by Zapatista activists now 5 centuries later.
As the 7-member armada of Zapatista conquistadors prepared to set sail for the Old World, they were cheered on by indigenous activists.
They are in the fight, in the resistance, and so are we. We believe a different world is possible.
Event organizers say beyond the symbolic conquest, they hope this action will help inspire global awareness for environmental and social progress through a more open dialogue between cultures. Manuel Rapalo, Al Jazeera, Mexico City.
The Zapatistas organization is named for the early 20th century peasant revolutionary Emiliano Zapata, who fought for agrarian reform in the Mexican Revolution of 1910. More protesting, this time across the realm, in Europe. May Day protests for workers' rights turned unruly as protesters and police clashed in cities like Paris and Berlin, as well as in other European countries, where May Day has been considered trade unions, workers, and labor rights day. But these protests held a larger purpose other than just worker rights. Pressing social issues such as race, overtaxation, poverty, and unemployment were on the lips and signs of protest participants.
Tear gas in Paris, an all too familiar sight. France's May Day demonstrations are, traditionally, a show of force by the country's mighty trade unions. A message for the government that power lies not with politicians, but with people. This year, labour unions were joined by members of the Gilets jaunes, or Yellow Vest movement, that kicked off a wave of anti-government protests 3 years ago. The French President Emmanuel Macron remains under mounting pressure to abandon economic and social reforms as the country reels from 3 crippling coronavirus lockdowns. For some, this was about more than workers' rights. It was a show of rage.
May Day is a historic gathering, but it has a global context. We keep on having protests, and then we feel like protests happen for nothing. No one's listening to us, but I think it's important to keep coming back.
In the British capital, hundreds gathered in Trafalgar Square under the banner "Kill the Bill" against a proposed law that would give police extra powers to curb protests. It's feared the changes will have a chilling effect on the right to demonstrate. Among the crowds, Black Lives Matter supporters and climate change campaigners Extinction Rebellion, who paralysed parts of London in 2019. Under the proposed laws, people could face 10 years in prison for defacing monuments and large fines for breaching noise limits.
Inevitably, I think this is state repression. Yeah, this is the government saying that we don't want you to come out and voice your concerns against the system.
What these demonstrators are keen to remind the British government is that protests, by their very nature, are disruptive, and that any new laws designed to curtail people's right of assembly damage the country's democracy. In the German capital, Berlin, a peaceful march by protesters on the eve of May Day demanding affordable homes after the Constitutional Court overturned a law that set a rent cap on apartments in the city. 85% of Berliners rent rather than own their own home. 3 countries, 3 different struggles, but a common thread. These are the faces of Europe's young. Students, those struggling to find work, others looking for security in a fragile labour market.
Workers and students, rise and fight!
As Europe starts to emerge from lockdown, a reminder that many old frustrations haven't gone away, and in some cases, they've deepened. Neve Barker, Al Jazeera, London.
Thanks to Al Jazeera once again for that audio clip. As U.S. state governments start to unlock the symbolic cages that most North Americans have been confined to due to the big pandemic, more unstable people are releasing their pent-up tensions on one another. Alleged incidents of violence or so-called unruly passenger behavior are up from 100 to 150 formal cases in average year to 1,300 so far this year in 2021 nationwide, according to the Federal Aviation Administration. Case in point, what is being called the Big Brawl at MIA that happened less than 48 hours ago. And by the way, this is the second brawl at MIA, or Miami International Airport, in under a month. Here's ABC affiliate WPLG News 10 with more.
Police making an arrest after a frenzied fight at Miami International Airport.
2 women going at it while other travelers instigated that fight. Let's go to Local 10's Leanne Motorhome live now with this wild video. Leanne.
And that video making it to the public freakout sub on Reddit. If you know anything about that, you know it's got to be a big public freakout, a big public chaos event for it to make it there. Lots of people talking about this one everywhere, and it happened right here at MIA.
Complete chaos unfolding near Gate G15 at Miami International Airport. The video now making the rounds, going viral on social media. According to a document from airport police, quote, units responded after passengers were reportedly fighting aboard the aircraft. Passengers had to be deplaned due to an irate female refusing to comply. Police went on to arrest Alexis Beatty from Chicago for disorderly conduct and breaching the peace. This is far from the first recent incident of passengers from or at MIA getting out of hand. Two groups of people were recorded fighting in the American Airlines terminal last month. One witness told us the scuffle may have started over available seats on the plane. Police arrested 20-year-old Jamil Dequeer for disorderly conduct. And on May 1st, police in New York arrested a woman for reportedly assaulting a flight attendant during an American Airlines flight from Miami. Detectives say the woman punched a flight attendant after refusing to comply with mask requirements.
As for the incident that was captured on that video we showed you right at the top of the piece, we understand that when she was on board the plane, she allegedly was getting violent with the flight crew, belligerent with some of the other passengers, and then what you saw here when she got off of the plane. Eventually, all those passengers got back on the plane and over to their destination, and Beatty was taken to the local jail. Reporting live at Miami International Airport, I'm Leanne Morejon, Local 10 News.
Quite the scene there. Thanks, Leanne.
This so-called trend usually has been attributed to face mask confrontations or seat disagreements and personal space arguments and airport booking errors. According to MIA spokesman Greg Ginn, incidents at airports are also up despite flight traffic being down. Flight traffic may be down, but longer lines at airport ticket counters and checkpoints indicate that traveler numbers are increasing since these virus-related shutdowns. And it doesn't take much to set some people off, especially when they're stressed out already. Stockholm University scientists say inbreeding is not avoided in many animal species. In a published research paper titled Meta-Analytic Evidence That Animals Rarely Avoid Inbreeding by Raisa A. de Boer, Regina Vejatrejo, Alexander Kotz-Chal, and John L. Fitzpatrick, dated 3 May 2021 in the Journal of Nature, Ecology, and Evolution. Now, this research revelation may or may not come as a surprise to most of us because animals will be animals. So what's the big deal and why the need for funding research about animals not putting their snouts up when it comes to inbreeding? Well, if you know anything about animal studies, especially under the westernized science models, you would know that the next step is to apply any findings, peer-reviewed or not, to human behavioral studies. In fact, the research article even admits to this. The study also looked at inbreeding avoidance in humans, comparing the results with similar experiments with animals. Quote, "We compared studies that asked if humans avoid inbreeding when presented with pictures of faces that were digitally manipulated to make the faces look either more or less related to studies that use similar approaches in other animals. And just like other animals, it turns out that there is no evidence that humans prefer to avoid inbreeding," unquote, says Raisa de Boer. She's one of the researchers. So can we infer that this particular study has been publicized as another facet of social engineering, a social segue from taboo to acceptance of something that, contradicting scientific research, has proven to be a violation of natural law and a violation with long-lasting, devastating outcomes? Stay alert for this and how it pans out in the coming days ahead. And for the record, John Fitzpatrick is the same lead researcher and professor at Stockholm University who published research claiming human eggs choose the sperm they want to fertilize them. Other research has debunked his research showing that sperm and eggs both chemically interconnect. That's not a decision, that's a blood lineage connection thing. But it sounds like his research funding is also pushing social engineering. And with that, it's a wrap for this particular installment of the Balanced Reality Report. I'm your presenter, Pharoh. See you in 6 days. As always, special thanks to field and content producer Chris R. and A. Kanak. Intro and outro music by Io Haya. Incidental music by Arulo and by Mixit.co and Envato Elements. Content edited by yours truly. Pharoh's House Potasode is the sole property of pharohshouse.com. All third-party copyrights revert to their original owners. To inquire about syndication or sponsorship, please visit our website at pharohshouse.com. Use of any third-party audio clip content is within compliance with the terms of fair use and the Copyright Act of 107. This report has been presented for informational and educational purposes only. If you wish to use copyrighted material from this report for purposes which go beyond fair use, you must obtain permission from the copyright owner.